Standard is about to rotate, and we've got a list of cards to keep your eye on for Commander.
I'm Mia, and I helped build Miso's cat tree.
I'm BZ. I forgot Standard rotated in the first place. We're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom, the best place to buy cards online. If you're going to use Card Kingdom at all, I would highly recommend it. You get free shipping on orders $50 or more. Plus, if you want to support the channel and yourself at the same time, just use the link in our description so that Card Kingdom knows that we sent you to their amazing website.
They have sealed, they have singles, they have accessories, they have a little bit of everything. They have a weekly sale page. Go check it out. Tell them we sent you. It helps the channel a lot. We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
Nerds
at checkout, you can save 5% of your real money tax dollars on everything on the site. That includes custom sleeves, mats, dual mats, whatever you really need. There's so many products.
We are going to be talking about Moxfield somewhere in the video, but you're not going to be able to guess where it is. And if you do guess and you got it right, you're actually a liar and you got it wrong. So I hope that's very clear. Patreon is also a great way to support the channel and get exclusive content that you can't see anywhere else, because we play games with content creator buddies, musical guests that we also have. There's podcasts that you can't get anywhere else. We talked about, like, if you're wondering what we thought about any of the Modern Horizons 3 commons and uncommons, we couldn't make a video about it on YouTube, but we did make a video about it on Patreon.
And if you want your decks to be a little less stinky because you have a stinky deck, we can help you with that.
We will de-stinkify your decks. So this is a video about standard rotation, and this is a Commander channel. Why are we talking about standard rotation? Well, standard rotation is when new sets cycle in and the old sets are rotating out of the standard format, no longer legal. They are Midnight Hunt, Crimson Vow, Neon Dynasty, and New Capenna. As these sets rotate out of standard and become no longer playable in standard, they're going to see a whole lot less play overall, which means cheaper prices for us Commander players. So we've got all these cards that we think you should monitor. Keep your eyes peeled. We'll tell you what the prices are right now, but we expect almost all of them to go down in the near future.
There are a lot of playable things in Standard that you can also play in Commander, so let's get started with the first set. That is Innistrad Midnight Hunt. A lot of people remember this for, like, Meat Hook and werewolves and all of that. There's a very, like, creepy overall feel of it, and it is very, very cool, but it did bring some good stuff to Commander. One of them is the Allied Slow Lands. These are $3.50 to $6.50 right now, and basically they come in untapped if you have 2 or more lands, and they are 2 colors.
Yes, they are perfect dual lands for Commander. They're the perfect speed. As long as it's turn 3 or later, they will enter untapped, which is the vast majority of the game, I would say. So these lands, yeah, range in price from the cheapest one, like $3.50, up to $6.50 right now. These are very, very good lands. It's funny you mentioned Meat Hook, not technically on this list because it's banned in Standard, so I wouldn't expect the price to change from it rotating out of Standard. Next up, we have Adeline, or Splendid Cathar, at $11. She makes tokens for everybody when you attack, like tokens attacking each of your opponents. So if I just play her on turn 3 and attack with my Thraben Inspector that was already in play, I now have 3 extra tokens. Adeline gets huge, so she's like perfect for any sort of go wide tokens, creatures, ETBing, even high power, like if you just care about creatures with high power strategies.
Honestly, she's great. She's great as a commander. She's great in your white weenie decks if you need just a big board. She's great if you need sacrifice fodder in your Orzhov decks. She just does a lot for 3 mana, and she can just get really big on her own. Plus, she has Vigilance and 4 butt, so she does make for a good blocker too.
She's also just been the cornerstone of, like, aggressive strategies in general in Standard and other formats. So when she rotates out of Standard, I think she might drop just a little bit, which will be great. And we have Jajar, Ghoul Caller of Nephalia next, $4.50. He makes a 2/2 Decayed token basically just every turn, because you're never going to have one. So you just keep making them, and it's good for repeatable death triggers, repeatable sacrifice. If you have a way to sacrifice creatures to draw cards or make mana, you just keep doing it once per turn for 0 mana investment.
If you care about any zombies dying or entering the battlefield or attacking, this can also help with those triggers because it's so repeatable. Plus, it comes down with 2 mana as the cost. It comes down super fast, and you'll be accruing a lot of these bodies over the course of the game, which can help chip in damage to your opponents.
I think Jadar was pretty slept on for Commander, at least.
I think so too.
So hopefully this, when he rotates out, people pick him up maybe for like $2 or something, and then people realize he's actually pretty sweet. Next up, we have Vanquish the Horde, $4.50. Also, it's a board wipe, but it costs 1 less for each creature in play. So really, you're going to get to, like, destroy all creatures for white. This card is so much better than Damnation, Wrath of God, Day of Judgment, all that stuff. I think it's like 10 times better because it's so much cheaper.
This card is so good. I've played it in a lot of decks that can run it overall. Usually I don't like the destroy all creatures clause because there's a lot of like ways decks can get around that, whether that's recursion or whether that's like indestructible or whatever. But being able to play it so cheap is what sets this card above the other ones, which BZ we were talking about, which those are usually like 4 mana or above. Those are not a rate that I would pay for destroy all creatures.
Yeah, this card has pushed so many other board wipes out of contention for ever seeing play in decks for me. There's a lot of board wipes in white. This, I think, just crushes almost all of them. You know, when we look at some of the best ones, like Tragic Arrogance, this, Farewell, they're pushing out so many of these mediocre 4 and 5 mana wipes that don't do anything fancy. If you're going to wipe the board, this is the new gold standard, is 2 mana. And so now that it's not in standard, hopefully it will be a little bit cheaper than $4.50.
I'm just happy that we're having a cost reduction white board wipe, because we were competing with like Blasphemous Act Prior, which is just 1 mana wipe the board basically. So I'm happy we also have white 2 mana wipe the board. The next one we have is Wrenn and 7 at $8. This is a 3 green planeswalker with loyalty 5. You can +1 to reveal the top 4 of your library, put all lands into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. 0, put a number of lands from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. -3, you create a treefolk creature with reach and its power and toughness are equal to the lands you control. Or -8, all permanents from your graveyard back to your hand and you have no max hand size. This definitely has a home in multiple decks, whether you want stuff in the graveyard or you just have a lot of lands that you're trying to put onto the battlefield at once.
I think this is just a pretty fair card, but I think that when it first came out, it was really, it saw a lot of play in standard, and it was like one of the de facto value planeswalkers. And I think maybe there's some price memory from that, and maybe it sees a little bit of play still. I just think $8 is a lot for a card that, you know, it's okay in Commander, but I think it's a fun card. Putting a bunch of lands in and trying to hit that ultimate is really cool. Maybe you're a Planeswalker deck and you want to just spike the ultimate right away. I think that $8 is a little bit high for how good it is. So hopefully when it rotates out, it just tanks. And I hope this card is like $2 because it's a fun card to play with, and I want people to be able to just afford it for cheap.
I think Planeswalkers overall, it's hard for me to get over that $5 like kind of hump, because I don't like playing Planeswalkers to begin with. They're very vulnerable. It's hard to get to that ultimate, and you're at its base, it's like pay X mana to do something sorcery speed, you might not be able to get it again. So I completely agree with you, and I'm hoping that this goes to like $2 or $3.
Our next Midnight Hunt card here is Augur of Autumn. It's $6, and it lets you play creatures and lands from the top of your library if you have Coven. Otherwise, you just get to play lands from the top. This is another like very fair card. I think maybe it saw some play here and there mixed in, but I know that once standard players don't care about this at all, it should go down, right? I mean, I think this is a nice little way to churn through your library in the mid to late game for Commander. And I hope that it goes down a little bit because it's just a total role player in like landfall decks or maybe even really creature heavy decks.
I think it's better in the creature heavy decks because, I mean, I'm seeing things like Realmwalker go up, and I know there's a lot of kindred things in Bloomborough that is making that probably go up, but I think it's also pretty easy to get Coven and just get 3 or more if you're running a very creature heavy deck, so I think it can function in a very similar vein of that.
Yeah, Coven's really easy. So we're going to move to our next set that is rotating out of standard, Innistrad Crimson Vow. This was like the sister set to Midnight Hunt, so of course they're rotating at the same exact time. The first thing to note from here, again, enemy slow lands now, not the allied ones, the enemy ones, either the white, black, green, black, etc. They range from $3.50 all the way up. Here, the most expensive one is like $18. That's gotta go down. I know dual lands in standard are usually in high demand because there's so few cycles of them legal. So now that this one's gone, it's gonna impact it. I promise. The Deathclap Glades and the Shattered Sanctums are gonna go down from their like $18, $15 range.
I am so happy to see that these are going down because standard is rotating out. I have needed so many Shattered Sanctums as someone who loves playing Mardu and just built an Orzhov deck, and it was kind of disheartening to see that it was at like $25 for a while.
I know, and I'm glad that hopefully they all fall into that $3.50 to $5 range, because we've seen some of the ones that are not in demand, like $3.50 for like Dreamroot Cascade. It's also seen maybe 1 or 2 reprints, but once they start doing that with all of them, it's over. It's over for these things.
You must not have been happy because 2 out of the 3 Abzan ones were just super expensive out of this cycle.
I think I have these laying around. I almost wish I just sold them now.
I was like, we don't have a Shattered Sanctum. I checked.
Yeah, exactly. So the next card, Hullbreaker Horror, $5.50. Control Finisher, used to be big bad and standard. Now it's just okay, I think, and it bounces spells and non-land permanents. This thing is a force to be reckoned with. It dominates Commander games by itself, and it even has infinite combos with something as simple as Soul Ring and like Mishra's Bauble. That goes infinite, makes infinite mana.
It's so nasty. For 7 mana, this bounces down at flash speed. You just bring, you bring spells back to your opponent's hands. You bounce their permanents if they try to hurt you or attack you. it was printed in a pre-con, so
Multiple.
obviously they think that it's, at pre-con level, but this is a powerhouse in Commander overall. It's just, I've seen you just end games with this.
The more printings and the less competing formats for this card, the better for us. We can just pick them up for dirt cheap. Next up, Cultivator Colossus, $16 card. It's 7 mana for a star trample equal to your lands. ETB, you can put a land out. If you do, you draw a card and repeat this process, so it helps ramp you. If you've got a lot of lands in your hand already, you can just chain this for a very long time. It's got a lot of commanders it works with. It loves, like, Henzi's a big fan of this. Any sort of, like, Tatiova or AC, where you're now drawing extra cards after this whole thing is done resolving. Just helps you totally mess people up. And it works with, like, Amulet of Vigor, so that now all these things coming in tapped actually are untapped. Spelunking is another one, too.
I've been looking at this card for my Uro deck recently, and it's $16, and that's a $100 deck. Obviously, I'm not putting that much of my budget of a chunk of it into that deck, but if it falls to $4 or $5, I think I might be able to swing it. I'm very excited for this.
I think you'd be lucky to hit 4 or 5, but maybe 10, maybe sub 10 we could pull.
I'm just hoping. Here's hoping, right?
Yeah, we're crossing our fingers. Another big giant boy that dominates games is Toxrill the Corrosive, $17. He shrinks your opponent's creatures. As long as the game keeps going, they're not going to have anything. They can't keep creatures in play. And you just get slugs as a bonus. And you can even sacrifice the slugs to draw cards. This card dominates the game by itself. It's kind of like a 3v1 card. They need very specific answers. They have to kill Toxrill. You can't build a board against Toxrill. You just have to kill it.
I mean, it's so nasty, too, because the slime counters, or the slug counter, slime, slug, whatever, don't go away if Toxrill leaves the battlefield. They just stop, getting the ability of -1/-1. So if Toxrill comes back and there's still slime counters on there, your creatures are still going to be small, and one end step later, they're going to be gone.
Yeah, we're just going to pick up right where we left off. What else we got?
We've got Hollowed Haunting at $13, 2 white for an enchantment. If you control 7 or more enchantments, creatures have flying and vigilance. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you create a cleric that says the power and toughness are equal to the number of spirits you control. This can build up very, very quickly because, as you know, enchantments are super cheap. You can just keep chaining them together with your Enchantress cards, just drawing them, playing them again. And so you could have a ton of spirits in no time with this.
I love this card a lot more than Sigil of the Empty Throne. I don't think that card's very great. I also don't think all of the enchantments that animate your enchantments into creatures, I know they're like Nyx, the 5-mana Nyx. Starfield of Nyx. I could not think of that name to save my life. But like that card puts your enchantments at risk of dying to removal like that they normally wouldn't have died to. This just makes new tokens, gives them flying, gives them vigilance. They scale with the game, so they're not just 4/4s all the time. I like this as a solid win con. But we're also factoring the prices of these cards in. Being legal in Standard means people are playing them in brews. People are picking them up. People are playing them casually at F&M. It's not just, are they in the top tier decks in the format? They're just not going to be needed by any of these players anymore. That's going to move to Commander. That's going to move to, maybe it just goes to their bulk bin. Maybe the interest in these cards dies out some. That's what we're looking at these cards for, too.
I also really love the fact that with 7 or more enchantments, creatures have flying and vigilance. That is pretty important to chip and damage. But with things like Wild of Eldraine coming out pretty recently, you can have the token enchantments, if you just have the ramping enchantments with Utopia Sprawl. I think that is very easy to get and sustain for the rest of the game.
Pretty true. Necro Duality is the next card. It's $16 and it copies all of your zombies. This is like a zombie player's dream. I think all of the jank zombie decks, they're going to move right into Commander. So I don't know if we're going to get a ton of reduction on this. It's definitely a card, if you're writing these down, keep your eye on it, because this is a card I'm looking at. If I want to pick it up for a zombie deck, the best time to do it will have to be after rotation.
Zombies were already so good. They didn't need another power piece. Every single zombie deck basically has an accidental infinite combo in it anyways. They didn't need something to make double their zombies for so cheap, only 4 mana.
Fun fact, this is also an infinite combo. Oops, I didn't know I could do that card. If you have like a Rot Hulk and a Necro Duality, you can start sacrificing the Rot Hulks to just get back each other forever, or at least when the tokens triggers on the stack, always get back the real one. It's a lot. It's a lot to do. There's a lot going on with this card. Pay attention to it. See if you can scoop one up.
Oddly enough, the werewolf in here is not from Midnight Hunt, but it's from Crimson Vow. It's Ava Bruck Caretaker at $6.50. 4 green for a creature that's hexproof. Beginning of your turn, you put 2 1/1 counters on another target creature you control, or if it's Nightbound, it flips into Hollow Hedge Huntmaster. Other permanents have hexproof. Beginning of combat on your turn, you put 2 1/1 counters on each creature you control.
Yeah, this is a way to give everything hexproof, but also it has hexproof, so it's kind of like a a mid-range, mid-tier threat that you at least know is not going to die to removal. So centerpiece of werewolf decks, because it's basically the best commander werewolf we have. All that stuff, the transforms, if you want to do that, cool. But I think people like this card because it's just a semi-threat that they know will stick. And maybe even counters decks want this card also. So 650, we can take it down, right? And I'm pretty sure this card did see a decent amount of play. But not anymore, so we'll take it, please.
I mean, green, it's so easy to get to that 6 mana point anyways. You can get that turn 4 if you're ramping enough. And then being able to flip it to put 1/1 counters on your entire team, 2 1/1 counters. That's a pretty big power boost, especially if you have a lot of like little dummies, like a bunch of little 1/1s. Turning them into 3/3s, that's powerful.
That's very real, yeah. Next up, Cemetery Prowler, $8. This thing used to be a bulk rare, and then it shot up. And now I think it's going to trickle down a little bit. It's 1 green for a 3/4 Vigi. You exile something from a graveyard. Spells you cast a share type with it costs 1 less to cast. And usually what you're going to do is you play it, exile a creature from a graveyard. Now it just says your creatures cost 1 less. That's kind of cool. It's pretty good for heavy creature decks. And then you can stack it so that you can say, like, if I attack with it next turn, I exile an artifact. Now, if I want to cast an artifact creature, it costs 2 less. So there's a little bit of stuff you could do.
Plus, there's just so much graveyard recursion or things that matter with like flashback in the graveyard or just little combo pieces that might matter later in the game. So it's nice to have that graveyard hate like on a repeatable way on a body, ETB, and if like as haste or whatever, just attacking, just sniping off cards left and right, that can really add up later in the game.
I had this card in a mono green deck, and the reduction was nice on it. I really think it is a fine card. Certain decks are going to want it. $8, that's where I get pause a little bit, but now it'll go down.
The next card is one of the centerpiece cards of the set, Olivia, Crimson Bride, $6.50. 4 black-red for a 3/4 flying haste. When she attacks, you return target creature card from your graveyard, tapped and attacking, but when you don't control a legendary vampire, you have to exile it, which is a very weird clause to have.
Yeah, basically when you don't control Olivia, but it's a little bit better than that if your commander is a vampire. Even if Olivia dies and your commander's out, you get to keep whatever creature you are. I think this kind of hits pretty hard. It's like a reanimator, but it gets you that, it skips the turn of waiting, like, oh, just you wait. It's like, nope, attack you with this, attack you with this other thing. You get hit by both of them right now. I get any ETBs, any combat damage triggers from it. I really think this card is cool. It's definitely right in that Averbrook Caretaker mid-power where I think a lot of people enjoy playing, so I hope this is more accessible.
I mean, it's a super cool effect. Plus, if you have the OG Olivia, you can be stealing other people's vampire, or you could be stealing other people's legendary creatures too, turning them into vampires and then keeping them on your side. So even if Olivia dies, you can still not exile the cards that you're like bringing back.
The third set that's going to be rotating out on August 2nd with the release of Bloomborough is Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. This was a fantastic set. I would recommend anyone who didn't or started playing after the set came out or didn't get a chance to look at this set too much, go back and just see all the absolute bangers at common, uncommon, rare, mythic rare. We're going to talk about our favorites or the ones that I think will most be affected by the price change, but this was a really, really good set. Number one, though, the Channel Lands. All 5 of them. They are absolute staples in 1 and 2 color commander decks, sometimes even 3. We're talking $6 right now for Sokenzan, the worst one, and up to $43 for Boseiju, the best one by a million miles. And then in the middle, like Otawara, is like 24 even. And I know all of these are going to go down because they all see a ton of play in this format.
I am always so happy to see these in my hand when I draw them. They're never dead. You know, they have the utility of an MDFC only. The fact is, they are not spells. You're actually channeling them when you use their ability, so it's harder to counter them if they don't have a counter target like ability or something.
And unlike most of the MDFCs, they just enter untapped all the time, and even they even give you a reduction, which was not necessary at all for any of them. But if you have your commander, the thing you always play with every game, they cost less to do the ability. Like, these cards are amazing. They're so good. You should probably just pick up like 10 of them if you can. I know that's a little unrealistic with some of the more expensive ones, but they're that good.
They're incredibly playable. I need like 10 of them. I need another Boseiju. I just didn't want to shell out $43 for one.
If you're lucky, you'll get to shell out $33. It'll go down a little, but it's not going to go down past 10. Don't think that's
I didn't think it would. The next one is one of my favorites, and it is one that divides people wholly. It's Farewell, $7.50. This is a 6-mana board wipe where you can exile their creatures, artifacts, enchantments, graveyards, or any combination of all of the above.
mainly all of them. That's what you do.
I do like to get my value out of it, and if I'm paying for the whole spell, I'm using the whole spell.
Yeah, this card is so good of a board wipe that people think it should be banned. People hate it. It's one of the most hated cards I've seen since starting the channel 6 years ago. I think it's a very good board wipe, though. I don't really stray away from it too much. I just think it's really strong, and it was like the part of the reason people are so salty about this is also standard. That is a factor in this. Yeah, there have been many Twitter threads of people hating on this for standard, wanting it banned, saying it's one of the least fun standard cards they've ever played with. So hopefully we can nudge that price down just a few dollars when it rotates out.
I think people are still going to be salty about it just because it is
for sure.
a very good board wipe in Commander, but hopefully the salt is a little bit lower too. The next card is Kodama of the West Street, $23. 2 and a green for a 3/3. Modified creatures have trample, which includes 1/1 counters. Whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you find a basic land and put it on the battlefield tapped.
When you start the game with like a turn 1 or 2 modified creature and then turn 3 this, whether it's in your command zone or just surprise from your hand, that's a pretty big swing. You're going to get the land right away, and then the lands that come in are going to fuel more of this later. And it also counts itself if you throw an aura on it or an equipment or put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then you just start getting even more lands, and it snowballs pretty fast.
I mean, especially if your like commander has 1/1 counters or something, because then you can chip away with like commander damage, or just overall if your team just has a lot of 1/1 counters and they just can't chump block anymore. I really like this card, and I'm not surprised to see it at $23.
I actually was. I thought this was a $10 card in my head, but, I wasn't paying attention to the price for, the entirety of the sets stay in standard after it came out. So this serves me right. I mean, I should have bought them when they were cheaper.
Maybe it was the other Kodama. I mean, I know that one was hiking up for a little bit.
Next up is a card that has dominated standard or been a serious force to be reckoned with for the entirety of its standard run. The Wandering Emperor, which is $19 currently. It's a 4-mana planeswalker with flash. You can exile something, make a samurai, or put a counter on something. It's kind of like a surprise removal spell. I don't know if there's a ton of hype for this in Commander. I think people are going to want to experiment with it a little bit, and it's definitely not going to be $19. I mean, this probably sees a little bit of Pioneer play, but I don't think it sees play in any other format. So hopefully this is a card that goes from like $19 to $5. And if you wanted to experiment with it, if you wanted to play it as a cool removal spell that's got some flavor and some pizzazz to it, hopefully you can pick it up after it rotates.
I definitely don't think this is $19 good, and it's way better in 1v1 versus in Commander, but I think having a Planeswalker with Flash is super cool. I think that's very flavorful, and I think it might go in a lot of their Kamigawa-themed decks, or just overall if you want to have a little bit like more spice in your like Super Friends deck.
Yeah, you zest up a removal spot with a Wandering Emperor. Hopefully that goes down. But you know what won't go down? Our stock of Moxfield.com. We don't have stock in Moxfield.com because it's not a publicly traded company, but if it was, we would, because it's so great and the UI is so intuitive.
I love Moxfield's new feature. If you go to a profile of someone like us, your favorite creators, you can actually see all the decks that they've most recently edited and then also search over all of their decks. So if you want to see BC's deck that he hasn't updated in 3 years or something, you can still search for it and find it, even if it's not the most recent or even in the 10 most recent things we've edited.
And if you want to see my Carador deck, you can search it and then realize there's like 4 or 5 of those. Then all you got to do is a quick scroll and find the one that you're actually looking for.
Out.
Yeah, you'll find it. Moxfield makes it super easy. It also makes it easy to go to the next card. Thanks, Moxfield. Jingataxius, Progress Tyrant. He's $11. He copies your first artifact, instant, or sorcery each turn, and he rejects the first one of those things from your opponent each turn. Notably, it is only once for both. So if you cast an instant, on everybody's turn, you get 4 copies total. And if one person casts an instant on your turn, that's rejected, but now anyone else can cast one.
Usually people don't let this hit the field because it can get pretty oppressive, but I've played against this in Commander, and the table sometimes has to team up with each other. It's like, okay, well, I have a swords in my hand, so can you cast like a mana rock or something so it can get countered so I can send the removal spell at them? I mean, this is pretty powerful, especially if they are chaining together really powerful instants or sorceries.
This card's definitely good. I think it is feared a little bit too much at the Commander pods. I think it's worth 7 mana. It's a totally fair card. It's got a little bit of protection built in. I like it. But I do think it is probably over-targeted just a little bit. If it's out of standard, let's see the price dip, shall we? At Sushi, the Blazing Sky, $7. 4 mana, 4/4 flying trample, dies into 3 treasures or impulse draw twice. Pretty fair card, but it was priced to move for standard. I think they wanted to see a little bit of play, and I think it did for a minute. So with this, you get to choose. It's like, well, they fired off a board wipe. Well, now I'm going to make 3 treasures so I can rebuild my board. Or they spot removed it. Well, I'm really looking for answers or looking for more threats. I'll just dig for 2 cards. It's nice to have the choice.
I do like having the option. I feel like if people are wondering why we didn't put Junji on this list, it's because it got reprinted in a pre-con pretty recently.
Yeah,
and
so we're not really looking for that too much.
Yeah, it's like less than a couple dollars, I think, at the moment. But at Sushi, though, no reprints. It's still up there. And I think that this is a pretty good, like, turn 4 play if you're in like mono red, because you're going to be able to get in that damage or just get the mana back if you're afraid of it dying to something really quickly.
It's a very good dragon for dragon typal decks, dragon kindred decks. It also is red card draw, which is something we don't really get. So if you play this as a threat, you feel okay. If it dies, you get cards out of it in your red deck. That's nothing to scoff at. But that does bring us to Streets of New Capenna, the final set that is rotating coming up here. And again, the main thing with these, the biggest one to keep track of, is the Shard Triumphs, the land cycle. This is Jetmir's Garden, Spara's Headquarters, Rafine's Tower, Zeotor's Proving Ground, and the last one, Xander's Lounge.
Yes, those are all correct.
Those are the main 5. They range from $11 to $18. Commander staples, tried and true. They are going to be cards you need for 3, 4, and 5 color decks. They see a ton of standard play between Domain and your Rainbow decks and all of this other stuff. And when the set rotates, we're going to be scooping them all up. Like, standard players, just send them over.
I mean, I love Triumphs in general. I love playing my 3, 4, and 5 color decks.
You're obsessed.
So these are a must-have in a lot of those. And I feel like having lands in a more accessible position, whether those are the slow lands from Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow or the Triumphs, really opens up Commander players on a budget to be able to have different strategies they want to try because it's more accessible in their budget.
I'd say as a rule of thumb, if you're building a 5 color deck, don't go ham. Don't play all 10 Triumphs. That's a lot of tap lands for you, but maybe 2 to 3. You find the 3 that overlap with your deck's main colors the most, and definitely you want them. They're super great to fetch if you have nothing better to do. You get super mega mana fixed and at the cost of a tap land, or they can cycle in the late game when you don't need them.
Plus, the art is just really pretty. The next card, this one has been everywhere, it seems. It's Ledger Shredder at $18, 1 in a blue, and basically it says whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, it connives. That is so much advantage, whether that's making a giant flyer to beat face in, or you're just drawing, discarding, putting stuff less important in the graveyard, putting better things in your hand, and that's each player too. That's so much advantage in the long run.
This thing becomes a 4/6 pretty quickly. It's kind of like the Blue Sarah Ascendant. It's a lot more balanced for the format because it doesn't just start as a 6/8 that, you know, you have to actually build up to it, but it gives you a lot of advantage. You get to see a lot of cards. If you have discard synergies, it's even better. It just sort of like, I think this is one of those cards that can go in almost any blue deck. And there's even some extra synergies with counters or drawing or discarding like that just come up where you're really excited about this, or even just putting cards into the graveyard.
Or if you can chain spells yourself, like I know BZ casts a lot of little spells, it's really easy to trigger that connive. Or if you're just like copying spells, if you're an Izzet and you just want to be copying your spells, you can trigger that pretty easily.
Yeah, if you're somebody who likes to go cast a single spell and then copy it, that's going to be your second spell, and that just triggers Ledger Shredder right off the bat. Professional Facebreaker, what a red staple. It's currently $6.50, and it gives you treasures all over the place, and you can sack the treasures to draw cards, basically. It's red card draw, and it's red mana advantage, and it's a card that we have, like, no real replacements for. It's a staple of the Boros decks because it's going to help get you out of the rut of not having cards in your hand.
I'm happy to see this reprinted in the last pre-con. I'm happy to see that it's rotating out standard so the copies go down because I love this card. It is so hard to replace this, as BZ said. Plus, it just kind of fuels itself because it has menace, so even if you don't have a ton of other creatures to hit with immediately, you can still hit with that creature.
Yeah, I feel like if you play Professional Facebreaker on turn 3 and that's your first creature, there's like a 90% chance you're going to be able to get a treasure off of it between one of your 3 opponents not having exactly 2 or more untapped creatures.
Or just not wanting to sacrifice their creature. If they have a mana dork and one other creature, they're not going to be like, okay, well, I guess I'll get my mana dork killed so you can't get a treasure.
Seriously, Professional Facebreaker is a card that tests players' fundamental knowledge of Magic. A lot of people don't know when they have free attacks or when somebody has 2 blockers up, sure, but they're not gonna block. Like, there's no way they're gonna throw away those resources. So people do miss free attacks with Professional Facebreaker. I like pointing those out because I like causing a little chaos. I'm like, actually, they're not going to block. And they go, hey, I'm like, they're not going to block.
Hey, thanks, Busey. Attack you for 3.
Sometimes that does happen. that is a possibility. How about Halo Fountain?
Halo Fountain. This is a very weird but cool win con at $8. 2 and a white for an artifact. If you pay white and tap it and untap a tapped creature you control, you create your creature. 2 white mana and you tap it and untap 2 creatures, you draw a card. And you can win the game if you have 5 white mana and you can untap 15 tapped creatures.
Oh, that's it? Just 15?
That's a lot of creatures. However, you could do this after declaring attacks and untap to win. You can do this if you're like crewing things with vehicles and then you can untap all of them. It's a lofty goal. However, I don't think it's as tough as people might think, because sometimes people think, oh, I have to swing with all my stuff, and then it's like, oh yeah, they're susceptible to being removed, but you just do it at instant speed. You can win.
Yeah, usually this says if you have 5 mana and 15 creatures, your deck's going to be able to win the game with it. This is part of tons of like jank Rube Goldberg machines. We'll take all that, we'll port it right over to Commander at a cheaper price. Thank you. And the next card, this card, oh man. Remember when this card got banned in Commander because it was too good?
It was so good.
Yeah, Bootlegger's Stash came out, and it really just broke the whole format in half. But being serious, it is a $7 card, not the $40 that pre-ordered it had for some reason. It's $7, and it's good in specifically treasure decks. If your deck is making extra treasures or making extra mana from treasures, or even just has artifact leaving and entering synergies, this will power up your deck, and it kind of will be like a mana doubler or essentially like a mana tripler. This does not go in every deck, but it is pretty good role player in the artifact or treasure decks.
If you have lands that you're keeping untapped for some reason, like you just can't play out your entire hand because you're just putting so many lands down, maybe you put this in to make extra treasures. Who knows? Maybe those artifact synergies really work for you.
So Bootlegger Stash, definitely another one to keep your eye on. Next up, Obnixilis the Adversary.
This is one of your favorites.
I love this card. It's only $4. I think it's the cheapest card on this entire list. But I hope that the only reason it's $4 is because it's standard. So it's going to make copies of itself. It's going to slowly drain and gain. And you can fiddle with all these little pluses and minuses of him and the copy to just make things, I would say, like mildly inconvenience your opponents. That's all this really does. But I have liked it. And honestly, I put this card in a deck because I like it. It has overperformed a little bit in Commander for me. I don't think this card is terrible, even though that's what I thought of when I was putting it in. I just thought it would be fun. But yeah, this card is functional in Commander. Ideally, all the hype from this was from Standard, and it'll just drop down to a bulk rare.
I mean, this thing doesn't die. So you'll always have 2 copies because you're always going to sacrifice a creature to it. That's cool. And so you're going to be getting the Devil, which, you just make sure the +1, so you gain 2 life overall. But this thing is so mildly inconvenient that you don't realize you've discarded 6 cards to it until you have, and you go, where's my hand? And it only comes down for 3 mana, so this can start really, really early. Overall, it really has overperformed because people are like, oh, well, it's not worth me to send my attacks there. And most of the time there are better targets. However, you're still going to be getting that advantage in the long run.
My favorite part about Obnixilis is you're going to play it and minus the original to make a devil every time because that's just the best way to protect him. Now, if anyone has like a 1 power creature or 1 toughness creature that they really care about, they can't really attack into it because the implication is you're just going to block and then snipe their thing because they had the audacity to come at you. And so then they leave it back sometimes and you're just like, thank you, we've reached an understanding. Plus.
I've watched a table lose many cards to this, and it doesn't, like, 2 life isn't it that much in the long run, but it starts to add up if these things stick around, especially if you can do it twice in a turn.
All right, how about a win condition that is not goofy or a slouch at all? This is Jetmir Nexus of Revels, $6.50. It gives your creatures +3/+0, double strike, trample, vigilance if you have 9 creatures, and that scales down if you have 6 or 3. Kind of the closest thing we've gotten to Craterhoof Behemoth. If this is in play and you have 9 creatures and they don't disrupt Jetmir or put you below 9 creatures, the game is over. That is such a ludicrous amount of extra stats. Even if you just have 1/1s, Jetmir gives you 6 extra power of them, and it's trample. So this guy just doesn't mess around. I think for $6, this is already a good buy for Commander, but I would be looking for it to decrease maybe a little bit. Hopefully that moves the needle for some people who want to buy him.
I mean, he's very hard to kill because he has, 4 butt for 4 mana, which is kind of big to begin with.
He's just a cat. And he's a 5/4.
And then also he's the finisher commander in general. Mm-hmm. You're never seeing him till the very end where you're dead if you can't counter this thing.
Yeah, Jetmir shows up. He's like, "What's up, everybody?" And everyone's like, "All right, time to go home." He's actually not it's not very flavorful. He's the guy who hosts all the parties, but when he walks in, everybody's like, "Time to go home, everybody.
He
We're done
smells
here."
really bad.
Yeah, he's like really just a buzzkill. So keep an eye on all these cards for the upcoming standard rotation. That's around August 2nd. Probably a little bit after that is when you're going to see them drop because nobody's going to need these cards anymore. Hopefully you can pick some up for Commander, get some sick value out of it. And if you want more value, we've talked about the cards that are already worth buying. They're already at a great price. Check them out here.